Hey guys, today we're going to talk about resistance to disease in terms of the cardiovascular and the respiratory system. So learning objectives for this lesson is to be able to identify how many mechanisms within the cardiorespiratory system provide resistance to disease. So it doesn't necessarily stop disease from entering the body, but provide resistance to pathogens, external pathogens, and to understand the implication if things go wrong in these systems. So, in terms of resistance to disease, particularly when we're talking about the respiratory system, one of your first lines of defense is the nasal passage. So we've got this beautiful picture here, stunning. These little things here are pathogens like viruses and bacteria. And here you've got your nasal cavity, well, your nostrils that head into your nasal cavity. Now, if you think about what is in your nasal cavity, then you can start to think about how that affects, how that becomes essentially your first line of defense. So for example, the nasal cavity, it's obviously a passage for air. It cleans the air. Now don't worry too much about these big words over here and pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. You don't need to worry about that. What you need to know is it cleans the air simply by using mucus, okay, with cilia. So cilia is like these little tiny micro hairs that move things along the nasal passage. So if something gets caught in them, they'll get moved out of the nasal passage, such as a pathogen. And goblet cells, which simply make mucus. So if you think when mucus is made, if something got caught up in that and you blow your nose, then it would be outside your body again. It humidifies the air. Now that's so that the air is nice and moist when it gets to things that are delicate, like the alveoli, such a delicate tissue. Dry air would really be harmful to that part of the respiratory system. It warms the air, the nasal cavity, because it is quite moist and obviously warm. It's covered from the outside. And you've got lots of blood flowing close to the surface. That ends up warming the air, which prevents damage to the respiratory passages. And then obviously it smells, not as in it stinks, it can smell things. And you don't need to know about paranasal sinuses. Okay, so just the basics for that one. Now, if a pathogen gets past that first line of defense there, it may enter the bloodstream at some point. And that's when the white blood cells, or WBCs, they will head up the immune response. So in an average human adult, you've got 4 to 6 litres of blood, okay, and that consists of white blood cells, platelets, red blood cells, and plasma. Okay, so the plasma part is like a very liquid part of your blood. We're not going to worry too much about that. White blood cells are the defenders. They fight against any pathogen, any virus, any bacteria. Think of them like the army. You've got red blood cells, which are these things up here, also called erythrocytes, but you don't need to worry about that. They carry oxygen, nutrients, and waste around the body. So think of them like a taxi. Okay, they go via the lungs, pick up oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, and obviously when they're going through the digestive system, they pick up nutrients and carry them to where they're needed. And we've got platelets, and they clot the blood. So if you end up cutting yourself and you end up eventually with a scab, that's the drying of the blood that has been caused by platelets being exposed to air. So you think of them like glue. If we didn't have platelets or your platelets weren't working properly, you would continue to bleed, and that would obviously be bad. So if something went wrong in these systems, and not always because of a pathogen, okay, but if something went wrong in these systems, it might look like something like bronchitis. So itis always means inflammation of, and if you've learnt about the respiratory system already, you will have learnt about the bronchial tree. So itis, inflammation of the bronchial trees, or the bronchioles. And most of us have probably had bronchitis before and know what that looks like. Asthma usually results in the restriction of airways. So imagine a tube for air to go through, and all of a sudden that tube gets smaller. Obviously for air to go through it's going to be much harder, and sometimes it results in mucus in that airway, which has the same effect by closing the airway off. We've got emphysema, which results in a decreased elasticity of the lungs. So if you imagine when the lungs expand and contract, they've got a lot of elastin in them, okay, so they literally like elastic, they can stretch out and contract in. If you don't have that stretch anymore, okay, it becomes quite hardened, and it's very hard then to take in breath and breathe out. Myocardial infarction, if you break that down, myo means muscle, cardial means heart, so heart muscle, and infarction, well, basically it's just a fancy way of saying you're having a heart attack. And that can be caused by a number of things, including a blood clot in a blood vessel of the heart, meaning that the heart can no longer or doesn't receive enough blood in a certain area, and therefore that tissue will die, and often the heart will start to pump irregularly and eventually stop. And then you've got something like peripheral vascular disease, which is often hardening of the arteries or plaque buildup in the arteries and the veins, so the vascular system, usually in the extremities, so the places that are furthest away from the heart. Okay, so basically there's plenty of other diseased states in the cardiorespiratory system, but they're just a few to get you started. So go away, have a look for some more, and feel free to research these diseases, and make sure that you've taken good notes, and go back, review whatever you didn't understand. Thanks, guys.